Linda Kozlowski and Paul Hogan were once seen as one of the most loved couples in Hollywood, both on screen and in real life. To audiences around the world, they looked like the perfect match, smiling, charming, and deeply connected. Their chemistry in the movie Crocodile Dundee felt natural and effortless, making many people believe their love story was meant to last forever. Fans admired how their romance moved from the screen into real life, turning a successful movie partnership into a marriage that seemed strong and exciting. However, behind the bright lights, cheerful interviews, and public smiles, there were moments that Linda would later reflect on with mixed emotions. Over time, she began to see sides of Paul that made her question not only their relationship, but also the environment they were part of during the making of Crocodile Dundee. During filming, Paul Hogan was already a well-known figure in Australia. He was confident, humorous, and deeply respected in the entertainment industry. On set, he was often the center of attention, admired for his wit and relaxed personality. Linda, on the other hand, was still building her career and finding her place in Hollywood. While she appreciated Paul's charm and talent, there were moments when his behavior shifted in ways that made her uncomfortable. These moments were not always loud or dramatic, but they lingered in her mind. Sometimes it was the way he handled pressure, other times it was how fame seemed to change his attitude. What the audience saw on screen was a smooth and lovable character, but off camera, things were not always as simple. Linda later hinted that Paul's behavior could be unpredictable. One moment he was warm and supportive, and the next, distant or difficult to read. While filming Crocodile Dundee, the pressure was intense. The movie was expected to perform well, and Paul carried the weight of that expectation. Linda noticed that success brought confidence, but it also brought control. She began to feel that his growing fame created an imbalance between them, especially on set, where his voice often carried more authority. This imbalance did not immediately break their bond, but it planted quiet doubts in her heart. At the time, Linda did not openly speak about these feelings. Like many young actors entering a powerful industry, she focused on professionalism and dedication to her work. She believed that love and patience could overcome discomfort. The film was a massive success, and the world celebrated them as a dream couple. Yet, Linda would later admit that success sometimes hides problems rather than solving them. The set of Crocodile Dundee was filled with laughter, long days, and creative energy, but it was also a place where personal boundaries could blur and emotions could become complicated. As years passed, Linda began to look back on those early days with more clarity. Distance from Hollywood and time away from the spotlight gave her space to understand how deeply those moments affected her. She realized that what once felt like excitement was sometimes pressure, and what seemed like charm could also feel overwhelming. Her reflections were not meant to accuse, but to explain how power, fame, and personality differences can quietly shape relationships in lasting ways. This story is not just about a movie set or a famous couple. It is about how success can change people, how love can grow in complicated spaces, and how one woman found the courage to reflect honestly on her past. Linda Kozlowski's journey shows that even the most admired relationships can carry hidden struggles. By looking closely at what happened during and after Crocodile Dundee, we begin to understand why Linda eventually chose a different path, one that led her away from Hollywood and toward a life of independence, peace, and self-discovery. Before Linda Kozlowski ever stepped onto the set of Crocodile Dundee, she was already a woman shaped by strong values, discipline, and a deep respect for her craft. Born on July 7, 1958, in Fairfield, Connecticut, Linda grew up in a close-knit Polish-American family that placed great importance on hard work, education, and humility. Her parents, Helen and Stanley Kozlowski, were supportive and grounded people who encouraged her to follow her passions while staying connected to her roots. This upbringing gave Linda a strong sense of identity, which would later help her navigate the unpredictable world of entertainment, even when it became overwhelming. From a young age, Linda showed interest in acting and storytelling. Unlike many who chased fame, she was drawn to performance as an art form. She attended local schools in Connecticut and later graduated from Andrew Ward High School, where she continued to nurture her love for drama. Teachers and peers noticed her dedication and seriousness. Acting, for Linda, was not about attention or celebrity. It was about expression, truth, and emotional depth. This mindset made her different from many others who entered Hollywood seeking quick success. Determined to become a skilled performer, Linda pursued formal training. She was accepted into the prestigious Juilliard School in New York City, one of the most respected institutions for the performing arts in the world. Training at Juilliard was demanding, both mentally and physically. Students were pushed to their limits, learning discipline, emotional control, and respect for the stage. Linda thrived in this environment. She learned to value preparation over popularity and craft over comfort. These years shaped her expectations of how actors should be treated and how professional environments should function. After completing her studies, Linda began working in theater. She made her off-Broadway debut in the early 1980s in a production titled How It All Began. This experience marked an important step in her career, proving that she could hold her own in serious theatrical roles. Soon after, she moved to Broadway, where she played Miss Forsyth in Arthur Miller's classic play Death of a Salesman. Performing in such a respected production was a major achievement and confirmed her talent as a serious actress. Later, she reprised the same role in the 1985 film adaptation, which introduced her to a wider audience. Despite these successes, Linda's career before Crocodile Dundee was not glamorous. Theater work was intense and often underpaid, but she valued the artistic integrity it offered. She believed that acting should challenge the mind and heart, not just entertain. This belief would later clash with the realities of Hollywood filmmaking, where commercial success often mattered more than personal comfort or creative depth. When the opportunity to audition for Crocodile Dundee came along, Linda saw it as a chance to expand her career, not as a life-changing event. She did not fully realize that this role would transform her public image and personal life forever. Entering the film set, she carried with her the discipline of Juilliard, the humility of her upbringing, and the expectation that professionalism and respect were non-negotiable. These values shaped how she perceived the people around her, including Paul Hogan. As Linda stepped into the world of international cinema, she was still grounded, focused, and hopeful. She believed talent and effort would guide her path. However, she was about to enter an environment very different from the theater world she knew, one where fame, power, and personality could quietly shift the balance between people. These differences would slowly begin to surface during the filming of Crocodile Dundee, planting the seeds for thoughts and feelings she would only fully understand years later. When filming for Crocodile Dundee began in the mid-1980s, the atmosphere on set was filled with excitement, pressure, and high expectations. The movie was more than just another project. It was seen as a major opportunity to introduce Australian cinema to a global audience. At the center of it all was Paul Hogan, a national icon in Australia who was already beloved for his humor and television work. His presence carried authority, confidence, and influence. For many people on set, Paul was not just the lead actor. He was the heart of the production. Linda Kozlowski entered this environment as a talented but relatively lesser-known actress, stepping into a space where power dynamics were clearly defined, even if they were not openly discussed. At first, Paul's behavior seemed warm and welcoming. He was funny, relaxed, and charming, often keeping the mood light during long shooting days. Linda appreciated this side of him, especially as she adjusted to a new filming culture far from home. However, as the production moved forward, she began to notice moments when his behavior subtly changed. Under stress, Paul could become distant, controlling, or impatient. These shifts were not always obvious to others, but Linda felt them. On a set where Paul's voice carried weight, small changes in tone or attitude could affect the entire atmosphere. Paul's growing fame during the filming only added to this imbalance. As excitement around the movie increased, so did the attention he received from producers, crew members, and the media. Decisions often leaned in his favor, and his opinions held more value. Linda later reflected that this created an unspoken hierarchy. While she was respected as a co-star, she sometimes felt overshadowed, not just professionally, but emotionally. When someone becomes the center of admiration, it can be difficult for others to feel equally heard or supported. Linda also noticed how success seemed to strengthen Paul's confidence to a point where it sometimes crossed into dominance. On set, this could appear in small ways: how scenes were discussed, how jokes were made, or how criticism was handled. These moments did not necessarily involve anger or cruelty, but they created discomfort. Linda was trained in environments where collaboration and mutual respect were essential. When those principles felt uneven, it left her questioning whether her voice truly mattered. Despite these challenges, Linda remained professional. She believed in finishing what she started and giving her best performance regardless of personal feelings. Their on-screen chemistry remained strong, which made it easier for the public to believe everything behind the scenes was equally perfect. In reality, Linda was learning an important lesson about how fame can quietly change people. Paul was not behaving poorly all the time, but the unpredictability of his demeanor left her feeling uncertain. Emotional inconsistency can be just as powerful as open conflict, especially when one person holds more power. As filming continued, their personal connection deepened, which complicated matters further. Love and work became intertwined, making it harder for Linda to separate professional discomfort from personal affection. She cared for Paul, admired his talent, and enjoyed his humor, yet she could not ignore the moments that made her feel uneasy. These feelings were often pushed aside, buried under excitement, success, and public praise. At the time, she did not label them as warning signs. Only later would she recognize how significant they were. The set of Crocodile Dundee became a turning point in Linda's life. It launched her into international fame, but also introduced her to the emotional complexities of working closely with someone who held immense power and influence. Paul Hogan's behavior was not always negative, but it was impactful. His charisma could uplift a room, yet his unpredictability could quietly unsettle those closest to him. For Linda, these experiences planted early doubts that would resurface years later when she looked back with greater understanding and honesty. As filming for Crocodile Dundee continued, the connection between Linda Kozlowski and Paul Hogan grew stronger. What began as professional chemistry slowly turned into a personal bond that neither of them could easily ignore. Long hours on set, shared experiences, and the excitement surrounding the film created an intense emotional environment. In such settings, feelings often grow quickly, and for Linda and Paul, attraction blended naturally with collaboration. To the outside world, their closeness looked romantic and exciting. Behind the scenes, however, love began to blur lines that might otherwise have been easier to see clearly. Paul was charismatic and confident, qualities that drew people toward him effortlessly. Linda admired his humor, creativity, and the way he commanded attention without trying too hard. For someone new to international fame, being close to a person so respected and admired felt reassuring. Paul, in turn, seemed energized by Linda's intelligence, discipline, and sincerity. Their differences created a powerful pull. While he was relaxed and spontaneous, she was thoughtful and deeply trained in her craft. This contrast made their bond feel special, almost destined. At the same time, this growing romance made it easier for Linda to overlook moments that previously caused discomfort. Small signs of imbalance, such as Paul dominating conversations or decisions, were often explained away as stress or personality differences. Linda believed that understanding and patience were part of love. She told herself that every relationship had challenges and that success brought pressure, especially to someone in Paul's position. The attention surrounding him was overwhelming, and she felt it was natural for him to change under such circumstances. The public response to the film further strengthened their connection. Crocodile Dundee became a massive success, and with that success came constant media attention. Interviews, red carpet events, and fan admiration painted them as a fairy tale couple. Being celebrated together created a shared identity that was difficult to step away from. Linda found herself not only in love with Paul, but also connected to the story the world believed about them. When everyone around you says your relationship is perfect, it becomes harder to question it. Paul's personal life added another layer of complexity. At the time, He was still legally connected to his first wife, and his past relationship carried emotional weight. Linda understood that entering his life meant accepting that history. She believed that honesty and commitment would help them move forward. However, unresolved emotional ties can quietly affect new relationships. Linda later reflected that Paul's past influenced how he handled closeness, responsibility, and change. These influences were not always visible, but they shaped the dynamic between them. As their romance deepened, Linda became more emotionally invested. Love has a way of softening boundaries, especially when both people are under public scrutiny. She focused on the good moments, the laughter, the support, the sense of belonging, rather than the uneasy feelings that occasionally surfaced. When doubts appeared, she pushed them aside, believing that time and trust would bring clarity. In her mind, commitment meant standing by someone, even when things felt uncertain. Looking back, Linda would later recognize how love and fame worked together to quiet her instincts. The warning signs were not dramatic enough to demand immediate action, but they were present. Emotional unpredictability, imbalance of power, and the pressure to maintain a public image all played a role. At the time, however, the excitement of success and the promise of a shared future felt stronger than any doubts. Their on-set romance soon became a real-life relationship that captured public attention. What started during filming evolved into something deeply personal, filled with hope and expectation. For Linda, this period marked the beginning of a long journey, one that would bring love, family, and success, but also lessons about self-awareness and the importance of listening to one's inner voice. These lessons would only fully surface many years later, after time and distance allowed her to see the past with clearer eyes. After the overwhelming success of Crocodile Dundee and the deepening of their relationship, Linda Kozlowski and Paul Hogan made the decision to commit fully to one another. In 1990, they got married, turning their highly publicized romance into a formal partnership. To fans and the media, the marriage felt like a natural continuation of a love story that had begun on screen and blossomed into real life. Paul was one of the most recognizable figures in entertainment, and Linda stood beside him as both his wife and creative partner. Yet, beneath the surface, the emotional patterns that began during filming quietly continued into their married life. In the early years of their marriage, Linda embraced her role with optimism. She supported Paul's career and appeared with him in projects such as Crocodile Dundee 2 and Almost an Angel. Their on-screen chemistry remained strong, reinforcing the image of a united couple. At the same time, Paul's fame continued to grow, especially in the United States, where he became an international star. This level of success brought new pressures, responsibilities, and expectations. As Paul's world expanded, Linda found herself adapting to a life increasingly shaped by his career. The balance between personal identity and partnership became more difficult to maintain. Linda had trained extensively as an actress and once imagined a future filled with challenging roles and creative growth. However, opportunities began to change. Many offers she received were limited or repetitive, often defining her only as a supporting figure. Meanwhile, Paul's status gave him greater control over choices and direction, both professionally and personally. Over time, Linda felt herself stepping back, not necessarily by force, but through gradual compromise. In 1998, the couple welcomed their son, Chance. Motherhood became a turning point in Linda's life. She chose to focus on raising her child, finding deep fulfillment in this role. While this decision brought her happiness, it also shifted her priorities further away from acting. Linda later shared that she felt complete as a mother and did not feel a strong desire to return to the demanding world of film. However, this shift also meant that her life became even more centered around family and Paul's career, reinforcing the imbalance she had felt earlier. As the years passed, the early dynamics that began on the Crocodile Dundee set became more noticeable. Paul's personality remained dominant, and Linda increasingly felt that she was living in his shadow. This was not always expressed through conflict, but through emotional distance and differences in interests. They enjoyed different music, lifestyles, and social circles. What once felt exciting about their differences began to feel exhausting. Linda later reflected that they had very little in common beyond their shared history. Despite these challenges, the couple stayed together for many years. They shared a home, raised their son, and maintained a public image of stability. Linda believed that long marriages naturally go through phases and that commitment meant staying through difficult times. However, as time went on, she began to feel disconnected from herself. The quiet doubts she once ignored resurfaced, now stronger and harder to dismiss. She longed for independence, self-expression, and a sense of identity beyond her role as Paul Hogan's wife. Eventually, the emotional distance became impossible to ignore. In 2013, after 23 years of marriage, Linda and Paul announced their separation. Linda later revealed that she was the one who filed for divorce. She explained that the decision was not driven by anger or resentment, but by a need to rediscover herself. She felt that they had grown apart naturally and that staying together no longer made sense for either of them. Their marriage was not defined as a failure by either party. Instead, it was seen as a long chapter that had reached its natural conclusion. For Linda, this marked the beginning of a new phase, one where she could step out of Paul's shadow and reconnect with her own voice. The early experiences on the Crocodile Dundee set had shaped much of her journey, influencing how she loved, adapted, and eventually chose to let go. As Paul Hogan's fame continued to grow, so did the public attention surrounding his personal and professional life. While success brought wealth and recognition, it also brought scrutiny, legal troubles, and controversy. For Linda Kozlowski, these issues were not distant headlines but real-life pressures that affected her emotionally and privately. Being married to a global star meant that Paul's problems often became her problems as well, even when she had little control over the situations. One of the most difficult periods for the couple came during Paul Hogan's legal and financial troubles in the late 2000s. Hogan became involved in a highly publicized tax dispute with the Australian government, which accused him of owing a large amount of money. The case dragged on for years and received heavy media coverage. Headlines often portrayed Paul as a rebellious celebrity fighting authority, but behind the scenes, the situation created stress and uncertainty for the entire family. Linda later hinted that this period was emotionally exhausting and deeply unsettling. During this time, Linda tried to maintain stability for their son, Chance. She focused on keeping his life as normal as possible while the media speculated endlessly about Paul's finances and legal standing. Living under constant public attention made privacy nearly impossible. Every court update or legal statement became news, and Linda felt exposed despite not being directly involved. She rarely spoke publicly, choosing instead to protect her family and avoid adding fuel to the media narrative. Emotionally, the controversies added weight to an already strained relationship. Linda had long felt that Paul's strong personality dominated their shared life, and now his legal battles demanded even more emotional energy. Decisions about finances, relocation, and public appearances were shaped by the ongoing disputes. Linda found herself adapting once again, putting her own feelings aside to support the family during a turbulent time. This pattern of self-sacrifice, which had begun years earlier, became more intense. The stress also highlighted differences in how Linda and Paul handled pressure. Paul was known for his bold and defiant attitude, often facing problems head-on with humor or confrontation. Linda, on the other hand, preferred calm, reflection, and emotional balance. These opposing coping styles made communication harder. Instead of feeling like a team, Linda sometimes felt isolated, carrying her worries quietly while Paul fought battles in his own way. Public perception added another layer of difficulty. Linda was often seen only as Paul Hogan's wife, rarely as an individual with her own emotions and struggles. Interviews focused on Paul's career and controversies, while Linda's silence was interpreted as loyalty or indifference. In reality, she was navigating complex feelings of concern, fatigue, and emotional distance. The lack of space to express her truth made her feel invisible. Over time, the constant pressure took a toll on Linda's sense of self. She began to realize how much of her life had been shaped by responding to Paul's circumstances rather than choosing her own path. The controversies acted as a mirror, reflecting the imbalance she had long felt but rarely acknowledged. What once seemed manageable now felt overwhelming. The emotional cost of staying silent and supportive became too high. These challenges did not cause immediate separation, but they planted seeds of change. Linda started to imagine a life where she was no longer defined by crisis management or public defense. She wanted peace, independence, and emotional clarity. The controversies surrounding Paul Hogan did not destroy their marriage on their own, but they accelerated the emotional distance between them. Looking back, Linda later suggested that these years helped her understand what she truly needed. The stress revealed her limits and forced her to confront long-ignored feelings. While she respected Paul's strength and resilience, she also recognized that their lives were moving in different directions. The weight of public controversy made it clear that continuing the same pattern would only deepen her sense of loss. In the end, these experiences became a turning point. They pushed Linda closer to the decision she would eventually make, to step away, reclaim her identity, and choose a quieter, more balanced life. The controversies were not just legal or financial events. They were emotional milestones that reshaped her understanding of love, partnership, and self-worth. After the divorce from Paul Hogan was finalized in 2014, Linda Kozlowski quietly stepped into a new phase of life that looked very different from her years in Hollywood. Unlike many public figures who speak openly after a high-profile separation, Linda chose a calm and private path. She did not seek revenge, attention, or dramatic interviews. Instead, she focused on rebuilding her life in a way that felt honest and peaceful. For the first time in decades, her identity was no longer tied to a famous partner or a blockbuster movie franchise. One of Linda's most significant choices after the divorce was to leave the United States. She relocated to Morocco, a place that offered both distance from Hollywood and a sense of cultural richness. The move symbolized a clean break from the past. In Morocco, Linda found an environment that valued simplicity, tradition, and community, qualities she had long craved. Living far from constant media attention allowed her to breathe freely and reconnect with herself without outside expectations. During this time, Linda discovered a new passion for travel and exploration. She began embracing a lifestyle centered on experiences rather than fame. This shift marked a powerful change from her earlier years, where her public image often overshadowed her personal growth. Linda later shared that she no longer missed acting or the spotlight. Instead, she felt fulfilled by living authentically and engaging with the world in a more grounded way. Linda also found love again, but this time on her own terms. She entered a relationship with Moulay Hafid Baba, a Moroccan tour guide. Together, they founded a travel company called Dream My Destiny, which focused on creating meaningful and customized travel experiences in Morocco. This venture reflected Linda's evolution. Rather than performing for an audience, she was now helping others discover beauty, culture, and personal transformation through travel. The business allowed her to express creativity in a practical and emotionally rewarding way. This new chapter showed how much Linda had changed. In her marriage to Paul Hogan, she often adapted to someone else's vision. After the divorce, she became the architect of her own life. The travel business was not built on celebrity status, but on connection and authenticity. Linda's role was not decorative or secondary. She was an active partner, deeply involved in shaping the company's direction and values. Emotionally, Linda appeared more at peace than ever before. She spoke openly about feeling free and content, emphasizing that happiness did not come from fame or money, but from balance and purpose. Her words resonated with many who saw her story as an example of quiet reinvention. Rather than chasing another acting career, she chose fulfillment over recognition. Linda's relationship with her son, Chance, remained a central part of her life. Even as he grew older and pursued his own interests, she continued to prioritize their bond. Motherhood, which once drew her away from acting, now grounded her sense of self. She viewed her role as a mother as her greatest achievement, more meaningful than any film credit. Looking back, Linda did not express bitterness about her past. She acknowledged the opportunities Crocodile Dundee gave her and appreciated the chapter she shared with Paul Hogan. At the same time, she was clear that her true happiness came later, when she chose herself. The years spent in Paul's shadow taught her resilience, patience, and self-awareness, lessons that shaped her second act. Today, Linda Kozlowski stands as an example of how life can be rebuilt quietly and confidently. Her story is not about scandal or revenge, but about growth and courage. She showed that stepping away from fame does not mean failure. Sometimes, it means success on a deeper level. By choosing a life aligned with her values, Linda found a peace that Hollywood could never offer.